Good evening and welcome to our very first class, Torah on YouTube. I've decided to choose for our first lesson a mitzvah which is relevant to the lives of many of us. As you know, the mitzvot can broadly be divided into two categories. Those commandments which are between God and man. Mitzvot, for example, the laws of kashrut, the laws of Shabbat, and the such like. And there are also mitzvot which are between man and his fellow man. For example, the mitzvah of not harming another person, of not stealing from another person, and the such like. However, there is a certain overlap between these two forms of mitzvot. And we find that some of those in this week's Pasha Kedoshim, which so happens to have the more mitzvot than any other Pasha in the Torah. I'm going to focus today on one particular mitzvah, and the mitzvah is the mitzvah of Lifnei Iver lo titen michshol. In front of the blind you shall not place a stumbling block. Now, literally what this means is that you're not allowed to cause a blind person to trip, which seems to be pretty obvious. Rashi, therefore, in his commentary, gives a slightly different take on the verse. This is what he says. Lifnei iver lo titen michshol. In front of the blind you shall not put a stumbling block. Lifnei hasuma b'davar. Before someone who is blind concerning any matter. Lo titen eitza she'eno hagenes lo. You shall not give advice which is not appropriate to him. Al tomar, don't say, Mechor salcha, sell your field, v'kach lecha chamor, and buy a donkey in its place. V'ata okef alav u'mnotla himeno. When your intention is to find a back way of eventually getting the donkey for yourself. So Rashi doesn't accept the simple meaning of the verse of don't place a stumbling block in front of the blind. The reason for that should be clear. We know from other places in the Torah that this is forbidden. We know, for example, in Pashat Mishpatim, that it's if a person places an object or digs a hole in the ground and someone trips over the object or falls in the hole, that you're liable. Therefore, it's clear that you're not allowed to cause a person to trip. So therefore, the Torah, by saying in front of the blind, you shall not place a stumbling block, obviously means a little more. Therefore, Rashi says it's not talking about a literally blind person, nor is it talking about a literal stumbling block. Rather, it's talking about a person who is blind in a particular matter. He's come to you for advice. He doesn't know what to do. You are the person with sight. You are the person with vision. You're the person who is now to advise him. And the Torah tells us that in front of the blind, in front of this person who's coming to you for advice, don't place a stumbling block. Ensure that you give him advice which is appropriate to him. Do not give him advice which is inappropriate to him. And then Rashi goes on to say, or give an example of this. The person has a field. He's asked you whether to sell it and buy a donkey in its place. Now, in principle, selling a field and buying a donkey in its place may in fact be a good idea. It may in fact even be appropriate for him. However, your intention is not his benefit. Your intention is to ultimately find a way to seduce him, not to steal it. That's clearly not the meaning of the verse here. We know that stealing is forbidden. Your intention is at some later stage to seduce him into giving it to you. So therefore there is a personal interest here. And the Torah is telling us that as long as you have a personal interest, that the advice that you're giving is not appropriate to him solely and absolutely, but rather there may be a side benefit to another party, to yourself, you are not allowed to give that advice. This is the meaning of the verse, Lifnei iver lo titen michshol. In front of the blind you shall not put a stumbling block. What it means is that the person is blinded to your personal interest. You're not allowed to take advantage of such a person and to advise him, even if the advice may be good advice. But as long as you have not declared your interest, it's forbidden. Now the reality is that no one may ever know, because it is good advice. How will anyone ever know that the real reason why you gave this advice was for your own personal benefit? Therefore the Torah continues, and the Torah says, V'yareita me'elokecha, you shall fear God. It's not a matter of whether you'll get caught or not. It's not a matter of whether anyone will be able to prove the case against you or not. God knows. You shall fear God. This, of course, has great relevance to each of us in our lives. We're constantly asked for advice. We constantly dispense advice. Many of us, at any rate. When giving advice, it's absolutely important to take sincere care and concern of the advice that you're giving, ensuring that the advice that you're giving is appropriate to this particular person and this particular person alone, that there is no personal, communal, or any other interest involved. He's coming to you for advice. He's asking you what's best for him, not best for anyone else. A parent asked advice by a child is not allowed to put any personal consideration into the equation. The parent must advise a child solely and absolutely as to what's beneficial to the child. And if there is any personal interest, he must tell the child, you know, I'm advising you, but I have an interest here. Perhaps you should ask someone else. If you're a rabbi in the community and someone asks you advice for themselves, the rabbi is not allowed to give advice which is good for the community, but bad for the individual. Even if there is some benefit to the individual, even if there is total benefit to the individual, but there is also an interest for the community, he has to say, hold on a second, I have a dual interest here. And perhaps that dual interest is influencing me. Perhaps you should ask someone else. So in giving advice, one has to ensure that the advice is for that person that you're giving it to, and that person alone. Otherwise, at the very least, you must declare your self-interest. Who knows? God knows. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom.